Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Watson. I'm the director of the Women's Resource Center in Alamance County, where we have been celebrating our 30th anniversary this month. We've learned from our founder, Becky Mock, about the early years and how the Women's Resource Center got started. Then we also heard from Heidi Norwick, the first executive director with the Women's Resource Center last week, and kind of her memories of the early struggles during her tenure here. And then today, Linda Stubblefield is joining me, and she is going to talk about navigating change and her experience with becoming involved in the Women's Resource Center, why she thought that that was a good idea. Some of her memories of it, and then we're going to take you down the path of the last 7 years and during my tenure as the executive director. So Linda, welcome to the Women's Resource Center's 30th anniversary. Thank you so much, first of all, for all that you've done for me personally and supporting the Women's Resource Center over all the years. Tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the center.
Good afternoon, Susan. It's great to see you there, and we're glad you're here. And it's kind of interesting. I like to tell the story. I really love to tell the story because it has so much to do with, I moved to Burlington in 2001 with John Stubblefield, moved my business up here. He moved his job up here. And when I moved to this town, I knew one person, and that was John Stubblefield. So I thought, now how in the world do I get business, and how do I make friends? And all of a sudden it occurred to me that, okay, first place I would go is take my business to the Chamber of Commerce. So I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and the very first person I met from the Chamber of Commerce was a Women's Resource Center board member, Diane Heath. And I can remember Diane Heath called me on the telephone at my office and wanted to know if she could come by my office and visit with me for a minute and bring me the welcome package. And we started talking about a new program that the Women's Resource Center was doing called Working Women's Wednesdays. And she said, you know, you might want to be a speaker for this with your background in business. She said, you've got to come. And I don't remember all the dates and everything, but I remember going to that first meeting like it was yesterday because I was just stunned and so impressed. I walked into the Alamance Country Club, and the very first person I met was a woman that used to be one of my customers when she bought store supplies for the pantry down in Sanford, a woman named Nancy Cooper. And so I sat with Coop and at her table and looked around and saw, I don't remember how many women it was, but it was certainly, I knew 2 people in Burlington now, well, 3, Diane, Nancy, and John. And when the break came, Diane got up and introduced me to Heidi and Becky and the crowd and a bunch of other people. And then the speaker started. And I remember this Elaine Marshall. She was the first woman Secretary of State in North Carolina. And she'd been Secretary of State for a while, but oh my goodness, she was powerful. And her message was powerful. And she had this group of women just right where she wanted them, talking about women working for women and with women. And by the time I got ready to leave that meeting, I thought, well, you know, I know where I'm going to make my friends. This is where I want to be. I want to hang out with these women. This is pretty cool. And as I love to say, almost every friend that I have made in this town has come as a result of being a member and working with the Women's Resource Center. It's been 20 years now, and it still happens every day. I meet new people every year, every time I go to a function. I got involved a little bit over at the center, which was only a couple blocks from my house, surprisingly. I mean, before I moved here, I used to walk by there and wonder what a Women's Resource Center was.
So
And
let's stop for just a second and change slides here for a second, because we've got some, I see Becky Mott just joined the call, which is great. She really struggled over the last few weeks putting together all of her pictures and trying to limit it to the time frame that we had for this segment. And I felt her pain as Linda and I worked on this over the weekend and then today with Kate. And Linda's put together some great pictures. I added some to it. And I want people to see what all, kind of was going on and what Linda was seeing as she was becoming involved. So it had already happened, the Alamance Women's Political Caucus and the Women's Agenda Assembly and Women Aid. Were you part of any of that, Linda?
I was not. The political caucus was before I got here. But
Right.
The Agenda Assembly, my very first assignment, I will never forget. Becky Mock said, "You will do this." And she took me out to ARMC, introduced me to Sarah Cuspin, and Sarah and I were given our first assignment for Women's Agenda Assembly. And you'll see some pictures. It's not from that one, but that's where I first met Nikki Triplett and so many of the other women. And again, I was blown away. Women Aid, I was actually part of the board when they brought up Women Aid.
Great.
And that was a great program.
So the next slide has got some of the programs and services about the time that you would have started coming on. Is that right?
I put together this brochure. That was one of the things that I tried to do for WRC, was use my computer thing. And one of the things we loved is the faces of the women at the top, and where we could talk about what we offered. And so that when someone got one of these brochures, they could see all the women that were involved with us. And yes, services changed a little bit, but this is one of the original brochures.
That's great.
You can go to the next slide and I'll tell you a little bit, because some of this was trying to address some of the places where Becky was trying to find things. Becky was talking, you and Becky were having a conversation about what was our most popular one. And Becky said something about Johnetta Cole, and you said something about the fashion show, and you couldn't remember why. We always did the fashion show in June because teachers never got to come to Working Women's Wednesdays. And we thought that if we would do it in June, we would give tickets to teachers, or we would encourage people to buy a teacher a ticket. And this was one of our first fashion shows. And look how beautiful all these members were. Our models were board members or Women's Resource Center members. And I remember some of the names, and some of the people aren't with us anymore. But Bonnie Honeycutt and Emma Jones and Becky, I can't remember. I remember how much I love this woman in pink, but I can't remember her name. She's passed away. And
Imogene.
Okay. And I don't know the other things. I recognize Kelly down in the corner, but I don't believe I knew the other two people. This was right at the beginning. But the fashion show was always one of the highlights of what we were doing here. And then if you go to the next slide, this is the record-breaking Johnetta Cole speaking. I mean, the place was packed.
I can imagine.
Taking reservations. She was incredible. And I don't remember, I think it was 150, 170, so it might have been close to 200, which is what I think that room will hold.
Right, yeah.
But she was just incredible. But so as we went along, I was here for a couple of years and did the things that I wanted to do with them, and they asked me to be on the board. I was interviewed by Gene Anderson and a few of the other people that were on the board then, and they extended an invitation to me, and I was thrilled. So, and then they immediately started to require all kinds of things of me that I love. I like to do things, and I like to talk to people, and so I was really, really good. And one thing I always like to do was ask for money. So nobody liked to do that. So they like to kind of having me there. But
so tell us about this 2006 board retreat. Go to the next slide, Kate.
This board retreat was a result of a couple of things. And the reason that this one was so special to me, I became first vice president, not realizing how quickly I might become board chair. Diane Amos, who was board chair, ended up moving to Asheville. And so she was only board chair for a couple of months, and all of a sudden there I was. And my first assignment was to do this retreat. So we looked at shoes, and the theme of it was shoes, and that you have to walk in other people's shoes. And we wanted everyone on the board to understand the challenges of the women we were serving. So we talked about this, and we went through and did everything based on that. And then the next slide is a picture of that board. I'm sure you're going to see an awful lot of people here that you recognize. I'm not going to go through trying to name them all, but one of the first things that stands out on this one is there's a man in the picture. This was the first person I ran into. Was his guy by the name of Tom Mold. And I say Tom Mold is a real man. He came to that board meeting with a young baby in a baby carrier. And we were just astounded, but almost a newborn. His wife was a professor at Elon, and she had to work. So he stepped up. He knew that the women on the resource center would not mind having that baby there, and they would probably even chip it and hold it for him and take care of him. But one of the things that Susan and I talked about that I think so important is understanding that we've had an awful lot of men be supportive in this. This is Brave Ones Come to Working Women's Wednesdays, but we have a whole group of people. I mean, people like Eric Henry and Tom Mold and Carrie Worthy and Dave Keister and Herb Cussman and Reed Dusenberry, my John Stubblefield, and board members Sean Baker and Dan Bullard. I mean, they step up to the plate and they support their women, they support our women, they support your women, and make this place work a lot better.
They really, really do. I think that's so impactful. And so brave of Tom to be the only guy there in the middle of all those women. He was on the board when I started.
Well, he came off and on. He's moved to Indiana now, but he was just a mainstay and always there when you needed him. The next slide just goes on to the next year's board, 2007, and you can see some of the faces have changed and some of them haven't, but we're constantly moving and constantly growing. The next picture is one of my favorites too. This is one of our programs that we'll talk about a little bit more about, and this has always been one of my favorites, and this is Book Women. When I came to Book Women and joined it, I looked at, they had a list of all the books we'd read since 1995. I took one look at the list and said, this is for me, because I'm a reader. But this is Jean Anderson was heading Book Women, and this just happened to be our picture back in 2013. I don't have a recent one. I wish I could give you one, but
you might have to take a Zoom shot of your current Book Women.
You know what? I guess we're doing it on Zoom right now, and we're averaging 12 to 15 people a meeting. So they're still reading and they're still complaining about the book, and we love them, we hate them, but we read them all, and we try and keep our opinions. So I see the next slide is one that you've put in there, and
I slid that in.
Correct. Deborah Wilson.
I couldn't help it. I thought it was a great memory. Yeah.
Yeah. Unbelievable. These are, I don't know the other lady. I haven't had either my memory, my old age is failing me, or.
That's Kathy Steinhelfer. She's been a member for years and years.
That's not Kathy, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, Kathy went to the gym. Kathy doesn't look like that anymore. Kathy's one of the most awesome women I know. Yeah, she's that's, I do know Kathy. Okay. Then we have another, let's see, anyway. I'm pushing up instead of down on my slides, forgive me. This is my first year before Diane scooted off to Asheville and I was still vice president. This was one of the first awards we gave from the Women's Resource Center. And this was like volunteer, just a lifetime achievement award, even at that point. It went to Jean Anderson. We're going to talk a little bit more about Jean Anderson because she was a real mainstay in the Women's Resource Center and we miss her terribly. But Becky talked a little bit the other day about the Women's Agenda Assembly, and I was laughing. If you go on to the next slide, we were laughing about what we had to do. Well, here's the first flyer that we put together, a formal flyer for this, and this was my first one, and just really incredible, real powerful stuff. You get to, and the next slide is pictures of some of the people that have spoken at these agenda assemblies, and we all get together. And like Becky said, I'm not going to go into a lot of details about it because she did, but I wanted you to see the faces of who was in there and the type of women you meet when you go to these. And that's expanded even more. We need to do more of this. This has not been as prominent since we haven't been with the state. We talked a little bit about some of the activities, and this is, if you go on to the next slide is some of our wine dinners, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Becky talked about fundraising. That was a big term the whole time we were there. It was part of Women Aid. It was part of our leadership lunches, a series where we tried to connect people with influence in Burlington to the Women's Resource Center and make sure that people in town knew about us. And we were kind of amazed that so many people really had no idea who we were or what we did. And our whole focus was to change that and to promote our brand. So this is some of our better ones. And up here, we have Jean Anderson and Heidi up there. That's also one of my favorite pictures too. And then the Women of Hospice down on the bottom, they always like to have that picture in everything we do. They're big promoters with Caroline Durham and the whole crew there.
That's me in the top left.
Oh yeah, that is. Look at you. That's your first one, wasn't it? I think it was.
It must have been. It must
before
have
we
been.
mid you sit at the kids' table with me and John.
I was thinking the same thing.
But so I guess the change, one of the biggest changes, I went on after I left the board after a couple of years and went back to spending more time running my business, but stayed involved. And then one morning out of the blue, 8 years ago, I received a phone call from Cindy Brady. And Cindy was very active in Women's Resource Center, always has been. She said, Linda, we need to talk to you. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, I've got a problem here. She said, as you know, she said, the state of North Carolina is ending our funding. And they're doing it gradually, and people are starting to get nervous. And she said, and there's just some things have changed around here. She said, this was in like late May, early June, and we always change the board and the president and everything, usually July 1st, end of our fiscal year. She said, the person that was elected president decided that this was not something that she was really qualified to do with all the changes, or not something that she was going to do. Then, so she's leaving and we don't have a board chair. And she said, first vice president has some job obligations going to keep her from doing it. We don't have a board chair. She said, we want to ask you to be interim board chair while we get all of this sorted out. And I said, oh, okay, what else? Let's talk about that. And she said, well, we have another issue. She said, our executive director has resigned effective July 1st. I said, oh, God. She said, yeah. She said, so we've got to deal with that. And we're going to have to get a new executive director. And we thought if you would please come work with us till we get through this. And it's, it'll probably only be 60, 90 days. And John remembers the 60, 90 days more than I do because that's what I told him. But she said, so I said, okay, let's do this and find out what it is and see if we can't get all this back on track. So I got the keys from the executive director on the day she left, and I went back to the office and started checking through things. It was 4th of July weekend, because I remember that like it was yesterday too. And I started going through everything. And obviously the first thing I had to do was I wanted to look at the financials because that's kind of my background. And the first thing I noticed was I opened up the QuickBooks and I started looking there, and it just didn't look right. And I thought, well, I've got all weekend, I can look at this. But then I started going and I started finding bills that hadn't been paid and some things that just had not happened that I don't know whether the board was aware of or not, but it kind of put us in a tenuous situation. And before the weekend was over, I knew how much trouble we were really in, and that the challenge was going to be much, much greater. What did I have to do first? First thing I had to do was determine just what had to be done financially. But then the second thing I had to do was march across the parking lot, go to the First Presbyterian Church and let them know what was going on, that our director was gone and that I was going to be interim board, and introduce myself. I'd not met Ron Scheib at that point, the minister there. And so I introduced myself to everybody, and the person responsible for paying the bills at the church told me, she said, well, we figured something was going on over there because we got a notice from the power company they were cutting off your power on Friday of last week. I went, what? And she said, well, the bill hadn't been paid in 3 months, so we just went ahead and paid it to make sure that there were no surprises. So I go back and start digging into it, and I figure I better call in reinforcements. So my first call was to Marty Asher, who was the board treasurer, and then I called Diane Heath. Now, Diane Heath and I had become really good friends since our first meeting 10 years before. And Marty and Diane and I spent major hours going over every single expenditure, every penny coming in, every penny going out, and trying to determine, what this was going to look like when the state pulled our funding, which was not very far away. Then my second thing I had to do was go over and have a meeting with United Way, who was our second biggest funder. When you're in a nonprofit and you're funded, part of your fiscal responsibility is to keep the people that are donating to you aware of what is going on. And are we still live?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just getting funny things on my screen.
Kate,
That's okay.
Kate is having some technical challenges with the screen share.
Okay, that's okay. And so I then called an emergency meeting of the executive board, and I updated them on what was going on. We moved the retreat back another month because that was supposed to happen in a couple of days. And so that we could make sure that we had proper information and numbers and everything for the board. And the retreat came around a couple of weeks later, and the mandate to the board was, and they're the ones that came up with the term back in the beginning, well, we're going to have to put on our big girl panties and handle this. We've got to get this problem handled. I fixed up a little gift bag for everybody on the board. I went to Walmart and bought everybody a pair of size 14 ladies' panties. Women would know how big those are, men might not. But everybody got a pair of panties. They must have put them on and worn them because The mandate was we get it straightened out or we close the doors. And nobody wanted to close the doors. Everybody understood just how important the Women's Resource Center was to the community. And they, by the time we got it handled, I'm not going to go into all the details. I could tell you dark tales forever, but the big deal is that, yes, it did get handled. The board stuck to it. They found the money. They raised the money.
It was
They
2013,
went to the
Becky.
donors. Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable what they did and the work they did and that they continue to do. When anybody talks to you about being on the WRC board and they tell you it's a working board, believe me, this is a working board. But if you have an expertise, this is where you get to use it and really show your stuff. I was fortunate that during that time too, I mean, Marty Asher actually
Go to the next slide,
nominated
please.
me for United Way for an award. And I actually, the Women's Resource Center won the award for the volunteer award. And then I also won the governor's award because we were able to keep this open. And by then, state funding was gone. And do you know how hard it was to stand there and shake the hand of somebody from the state when we just had all our funding? I just wanted to say something to him, but I couldn't. But by this time, we had hired Susan. We had gone out and done a major search looking for an executive director. It looked like we could afford to pay one for 6 months. When we hired her, we told her, we don't know, but we're pretty sure we're good for 6 months. And she took a leap of faith, just like the Presbyterian Church did, just like all the people that kept supporting us. And she took the job. Go down, Kate, go down a couple of slides. We'll go to the next slide and let's just talk. This is some of the people that worked at the center and helped with the center while we were making the transition and the change was going in. I mean, Sherry and Betsy, and we had interns, and this Cam Clark and Chrisman. I can remember her last name's Chrisman. I loved her. She was so sweet. And then Sherry Martin. I mean, just everybody chipped in and did more work than they should ever. I'm going to turn the questions and everything back over to Susan. And then if she's got anything she wants some reinforcement on, you want me to address the slide that's up here, Susan?
Yeah.
This is Dion, Dr. Dion, who was the executive director for a while. This is Terry Kirchen, one of our funders and one of our dear friends and members, making a donation to the center. So
I just love this picture. Dion had a tough job because that year 2013 that you were just talking about, she was the director between Heidi Norwick and myself. And I don't think I've met her in person, and she had since moved away, got married, became a minister, I think. But she's not currently in the area. And I love this picture of Terry smiling so big. And the reason is because every year Terry has stopped by the center to present a donation. And we are just so grateful for that. Let's go to the next slide. That was part of Linda's presentation that she had sent. My first headshot, I guess.
Well, I backed you up into the wall in your office and said, smile.
She did. That was my first day here. And I'm thinking,
And then
what
the
in
last time you
world?
smiled.
All right, let's go to the next one. So I thought this was really important because Linda's very complimentary of me because she hired me. And then she spent the next 6 months literally dragging me by the arm all over the county to introduce me to everybody that she knew. But I thought this was important to kind of show the founders, Becky, Tanala, Beholt, Martha Smith. and the executive directors, Heidi and Dion and myself. It's a small organization, but I'm just following the path that was laid out. And when Linda and the board of directors in 2014 offered me the position, I was scared to death, just absolutely scared to death, but there was no way that I could turn it down. And she was blatantly honest. You know, we might be closing the doors in 6 months. We've got enough money to get to the Herb Festival. And then the Herb Festival was going to carry us to the end of the fiscal year. And we weren't sure that we were going to do anything after that. But I knew from listening to their story that this board of directors was so strong and so committed to the work of the center. And during the 6 months that Linda ran the center without pay, they looked at possibly closing. They went and visited other women's resource centers to see what they were doing and how they were managing. Some of them closed during that time because the displaced homemaker program and the divorce filing fees went away. And that was the loss of about $55,000, I think, to the center right in the year as I was getting started. And that was significant funding. So we weren't sure what we were going to do at that point. Let's go to the next slide. So these were the first two people I met because
The cavalry.
yeah, before I even heard from Linda or before I even threw my hat into the ring and sent in my resume, the director from the Women's Resource Center in Greensboro called me and she said, there's this group over in Burlington and they're looking for an executive director. Would you be interested? And I thought, gosh, I don't know anybody in Alamance County. I got up on a Saturday morning and drove over here literally to spy on the land. I had no idea if I wanted to make the drive, wanted to see what it looked like. And I pulled into the neighborhood and then turned the corner and this huge church campus opened up. And all I could think of was, oh my goodness, this is a really big steeple and a very big sign to me, because if this Women's Resource Center sits on the property of this church, they've got some pretty good support in the community. And then I pulled around to the back and to the parking for the Women's Resource Center and saw 2 cars at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And so I thought, well, if they're here, I'm going to knock on the door. And it turned out to be Diane Heath and Marty Asher, 2 board members who were here working on the books for the next board meeting. And we chatted for a few minutes. They were just so gracious. And they were already looking at resumes and interviewing candidates, but they told me to put in my resume. And all I could think of was, you know, if you've got board members who are working on Saturday morning to make sure that this thing's going to make it, that's a pretty good sign. Next slide. So Linda, I had to throw this in there. I had this. Again, it's Terry Kirchin, but it's a great picture of the 2 of you as friends, as members of the Women's Resource Center, as supporters. And I knew if I had these folks coming along in support of the center, we probably are going to make it because we've got a really strong board of directors. Next slide.
You know, Susan, I met Terry Kirchin at a leadership lunch, and we've been best of friends since that day. We laugh that we look so much alike, and we both laugh a lot.
You do, and that's why I love that picture so much.
Yeah.
So this is the mission and the vision of the Women's Resource Center. It's tweaked a little over the years as we've gone through some consultants and capacity building, but we empower women to improve and enrich their lives. supporting them through life transitions to achieve stability, self-sufficiency, sustainability, and success. And our vision is that all women in Alamance County reach and live into their full potential. Next slide. I want to give a shout out right here to the United Way of Alamance County for their partnership and support of our Success Toolkit program. Next slide. So Linda had a job when I started. We had to decide what we were going to call our program if the Displaced Homemaker program had been canceled by the state of North Carolina. And we had a lot of debate over this, and there was even a little logo for this, what we ended up coming up with, the Success Toolkit. And the reason for that is because we knew that every woman that comes in the door of the Women's Resource Center has her own set of tools. She already has a set. And if you think about a toolkit opening up and a place for all the tools, she might have a few missing ones. Maybe she didn't finish her education. Maybe she doesn't understand finance. Maybe she needs a job. She's got a set of tools. Our job was to help her evaluate what they were and to think about the things that needed maybe some polish, a little cleanup. And so that was how the name of the program was born. And over the years, a lot of the programming that had gone on again through Heidi's and Becky's and Dion's tenure, we still did. We just did it under a little different branding as the Success Toolkit. We put in a career series supporting women through their careers, how to get a job, resumes, mock interviews, things to look about their job search strategy, which, oh my goodness, has changed just in the years that I've been here and now that everything is online. Financial mastery workshops, mentoring, coaching. I think that's one of the things that we do best is the coaching and the mentoring, and the idea that a woman comes into the center or calls on the phone and there's somebody to listen to her story, to hear what kind of transition she's going through right now, and to wrap around her with resources in the community, programs and services that we're offering, such as Breaking Up and Moving On, which is a monthly legal workshop. Leadership recognition through Leading the Way, professional development, and personal enrichment through the Working Women's Wednesday series. Next slide. So this was actually Linda's slide earlier, but because I was in it with John, I decided to move it into this position and talk a little bit more about the wine dinners and what a great partnership this was with John Stubblefield, with Linda, and with Pregos from the community, because they would partner. Linda and John and Vincent would come up with these wonderful menus. John would pair the wines with it and then talk about that at the wine dinners, which was a fundraiser, as Becky said, for the Women's Resource Center. We had to just hit the ground running, and wine dinner, I think that fall was at spring was one of the first fundraisers that we did. Next slide. I couldn't let this go by without adding a picture of Vincent and his team. And then I think the one in the bottom right corner was the last wine dinner last March, possibly just before COVID got started. The wine dinner, I think, was one of the last things that we did last year in person. But
it was actually the night before they shut everything down.
Yeah. So we just have appreciated the community partners that we've had over the years. Next slide. We can't leave this afternoon without talking about Leading the Way. This is a new fundraiser. When I started, the main fundraiser for the Women's Resource Center was the Spring Herb Festival. And but we knew that we needed something to balance it in the fall. And it was actually Marty Asher's idea that came up at a board meeting. And she said, what about some leadership recognition? So we started that very first year taking nominations from the community for women who were leading the way in Alamance County. And we wanted to be the organization that presented a couple of awards at a seated dinner, again, fundraiser, friend raiser. But the idea that we kind of stole or we've used over and over the last several years, the quote from Arthur Ashe: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And we add to take your next step forward. So for leading the way, that's like thinking about a woman's leadership path. She may be in transition when she comes to the Women's Resource Center, but all along the way, there's something here, somebody here, supporters, volunteers that wrap around women during transitional times and create a leadership path here at the Women's Resource Center. Next slide. So we're going to run through these slides because I know we're getting close to some time constraints for us. But 2014 was the first year for the Leading the Way, and these were our winners. And Kate, you can just keep going through these so that we see the next ones. These were such fun events. Then we created a Visionary Award. And this is Marty Asher. And then Becky Mock with Tyrona Hooker, who was the speaker. The nominees that year. Winners.
You know, Susan, as you go through these, one of our issues when we started this whole thing was, can we find enough women to really meet these requirements? Will we get nominations? And when you look at these pictures, you can see there are so many women that rise up in Alamance County and that do so much to help other women. And this is just a pictures of a few of them.
Yeah, we're going to stop right here for just a minute. Back up one, Kate, please. So I owe an apology. I know Kathy Dusenberry is on the call. We don't have a picture of the winners because this was a Zoom event for 2020. We were not able to present these awards at a seated dinner in person, but Kathy Dusenberry was our Founders Award winner, and Dewana Warren Bigelow was our Rising Star for this fall. I think it's important to recognize, and I'm really glad you said that, Linda, every year that we've done this, and we had a couple of people early on that were concerned we were going to run out of people. And I just don't feel that way. And I'm amazed every year we learn of new and different people that are nominated. And we may even be tweaking this process this year. The board may make some changes to it because all of these women that have been nominated deserve to be award recipients. And that whole process is so hard to choose recipients for these awards. Let's go to the next slide. The next ones, and you'll see Jean Anderson right there in the center. There's some, you've seen her in almost all of the group pictures as you go through. It's hard to find a group picture over the years that doesn't have Jean Anderson in it. And so I just have created this thread to kind of show this. Next slide. This is another old one, but Jean's front and center again in front of Heidi there. And that's Sarah Kussman with her back turned around. But this is another one of those women's agenda assemblies, I think. Next slide. Again, Jean's leading a group here, a small group session. Next slide. She's speaking. The first time I put together a slideshow for leading the way, her face just kept popping up over the years. Next slide. This is a quote. There comes a day when you realize turning the page is the best feeling in the world, because you realize there's so much more to the book than the page you were stuck on. This was a quote that was sent to me by Marty Asher before she passed. She too was a longtime member and supporter and board member of the center. And this is a quote that I think Marty felt was applicable to the women who are in transition coming into the center. Next slide. More of the staff and board member pictures, people that have crossed my path over the last several years that have just absolutely meant the world to me. Betsy and Sherry down there in the bottom left were the staff. They were the staff when I started here. They were both 20 hours each. They were a little hesitant at their new executive director. They'd been working with Linda over the prior 6 months, and they were just wonderful to work with. And through their own life changes, you know, they ended up moving on. When you've only got a part-time staff, it tends to turn over because a lot of people are looking for full-time work. Vonda Allen there on the right is one of my favorite people in the whole world. And she put up with me for a pretty good while. When we lost, I don't know exactly how the transition happened, but at some point Vonda came in part-time and I decided I could roll both positions into one person and she could just do everything. Which when the consultants came in some while later, they said that was really not a good idea. It's really hard for somebody to listen to somebody's story and work with them as a client and turn around and the director's standing over them going, okay, and now you need to do this for Working Women's Wednesday and do this. And oh, by the way, have you done the social media yet? And how about that donor database? It's not a good situation. I've learned a lot of lessons over the years, but the people and the continuity of the relationships over time have been so important. Next slide. Holiday gathering. These are some of the pictures that shows the continuity of those relationships over time. People who come together every year just to be together, to share food, to share a little wine, to do an ornament exchange, a cookie exchange. And our friends at Alamance Arts allowed this at that beautiful Captain White House. Next slide. More holiday gatherings. Next. Linda already touched on Working Women's Wednesday, this monthly series with dynamic speakers. Right now it's via Zoom and probably will be for a couple more months. You can join it for free on the fourth Wednesday of each month. And next week, we're having Annie Baggett, who is kicking off our herb festival, and she's with Sunshine Lavender Farm. So that's going to be a great one. If you've not registered, this is a great time to go out and do that. Next slide, please. Some more speakers from Working Women's Wednesday series over the years. Next slide. We can't leave today without talking about the Herb Festival. These are pictures from the 2019 festival, those beautiful plants. That was the last one we had in person. Next slide. These are some favorite pictures of mine. Next one. See, those guys are even fighting over the mop up there in the right-hand corner. That's how much they wanted to be there working. Next
Don't
slide.
know what we'd do without them.
Right? We even had face painting a couple of years, I think.
You had someone on your board that did it also.
Yes, we did.
Bill.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Next one. Some of our partnerships in the community. Wheels for Hope was a partnership that we developed. And this young lady was so excited when women work with us over a 4 to 6 month period of time on their budget. They are eligible to apply for a vehicle through Wheels for Hope. And we've been able to give away a couple of vehicles like this. One of the women was a regular client, and another one was through a partnership that we developed with Benevolence Farm, women who are totally starting from scratch all over again. We got into a women build at Habitat for Humanity. Next slide. More team pictures, more holiday gatherings.
We do a lot of gathering.
We do. I think it's just hard to not put in some of these pictures, really. This was a changing of the guard. I can't remember now who was coming and who was going. I think it might have been Catherine Porter's last day. But this was a group picture on the steps there as she was getting ready to go on to work at Alamance Community College. Next slide. Another team picture. Sarah, Brittany, Leanna. Leanna was a social work grad student from Carolina. Next slide. It's our current team. So glad to be a part of this team. Melissa and Kate. Melissa is getting ready to start grad school herself this fall. So we will be having another staffing change. Kate joined our team in January after volunteering with us some last year. Next slide. Again, we cannot do this without community partnerships. We're part of the Family Justice Center. We're part of Family Abuse Services, Benevolence Farm, Wheels for Hope, but these are our sponsors. Current organizations in the community who believe in the mission and the vision of the Women's Resource Center. Next slide. We mentioned United Way and their support of our Success Toolkit program. Next slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about Jean Anderson. You've already seen this constant thread through the pictures of her work with the Women's Resource Center. And many of you who watch this video will know her, will have known her heart, her spirit. And Gavin Stevens with the Alamance Community Foundation was one of our speakers for Working Women's Wednesday last year via Zoom. And she talked about going deep with the organizations where you serve. And as you look at all of these pictures, the continuity of the relationships over time, you see some of the same faces over and over again. You see them rotating in and out of the board, coming back on the board again. I was so honored when there have been a few of the board members who were on my very first board of directors when I got hired, whose tenure ended at some point, and then they stepped back on the board. And Jean was one of those people. She was willing to serve over and over again. When she passed, one of the things that she talked about over the years, she was adamant. She had no problem, again, like Linda, asking for money. She wanted the Women's Resource Center to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. And she loved the idea of sustaining donors. And so she herself became a sustaining monthly giver. And then she encouraged other people to do it. But the thing that we learned about Jean after she passed, we pretty much knew it. But after Jean passed, donations in her memory started to come in. And this was last year during COVID. Her legacy still continues. We are still getting donations from people that knew Jean all across the country, because everywhere Jean went, she talked about the work of the Women's Resource Center and what the mission of our center, empowering women, enriching lives, meant. And so when donations started coming in Jean's memory, most of the time they had notes attached to them, and they talked about how special Jean was, but how they knew where her heart was. And so I challenge everybody today to think about where you're serving in the community, and do the people around you know where you're serving and what it means to be a legacy donor, to be a legacy giver in the places that are important to you. Next slide, please. This is our sustaining circle. Folks who are giving on a regular basis every month to the Women's Resource Center. Some people don't want to do it monthly, and that's okay. They do it annually, or they do it a few times a year, or they buy tickets for the Working Women's Wednesday, or they come and buy plants from the Herb Festival. There's so many ways to support the Women's Resource Center. Next slide. So Linda, I'm going to ask you, because I know you don't have any trouble asking for money. And when you look at the mission and the vision of the Women's Resource Center, how would you make this ask?
Well, I start with saying, as a woman, you start off as a woman, the first thing you are is you're someone's daughter. And then depending on where life takes you, you're someone's sister, you're someone's aunt, you're someone's mother, you're someone's grandmother, you're someone's neighbor, you're someone's friend. There's so many things you are as a woman. And to know that as a woman, you can help other women. You're not giving them a handout. When you donate to the Women's Resource Center, you're giving them a hand up. You're giving them, through the Success Toolkit, the tools they need to make their lives successful. And there's so many people that don't have that. And when you donate, and please understand, we're always talking about money, because any nonprofit there is will tell you lack of money is their biggest problem. But you have to have the money to do this. And there's really no amount too small, no amount too large. We really like the two large ones. But anything that you can do to help celebrate these 30 years is going to help these women and help them create a life that's better for them and their community.
What's on that next slide, Kate? Does that help you out, Linda?
Donate to celebrate. We're gonna celebrate being women, and celebrate helping women and their families. And celebrate Susan being with us, and the board, and all the other things that make this so special.
I just want to thank you so much for being on the call today, and for reminiscing with me a little bit about the years that we've spent together, and your time as a supporter and board member. I can't let this go without a memory of John Stubblefield, your husband, because you've already talked about how important the men who support the Women's Resource Center are. And John has been just a constant at my side through these years. And I just so appreciate that, because when I think about the next slide, Kate, it's about the Herb Festival. And I think about him saving boxes and hauling boxes over here and coming to help me put them in the church. And I mean, trip after trip after trip of really hard work. He's been a volunteer here. He's helped us set up. He's helped us take down. He's come back and watered plants after the after sale. It's so important. Everybody gets involved. And you need to know that we are doing an herb festival this year. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be outside. We're ordering some tents, but we're going to have an herb festival, and you'll have an opportunity to even place some pre-orders online. So we are asking you to donate to celebrate our 30th anniversary, to come out and support the herb festival in April. And we thank you so much for being on this call today and for watching the video and sharing it with your friends. Linda, thank you so much. Really appreciate chatting with you today.
Thank you for including me, Susan. It was an honor.
Thanks everybody for attending. We appreciate you.